Hi, this is Pat Baker, Chandler Gilbert Community College, and I wanted to spend a few minutes reviewing using sentinels with a while loop. And I've got pulled up here our sphere calculation assignment that we already did. Remember this, where you're calculating a sphere's volume and surface area. So I'm just going to compile this, make sure it's running, and let's run it again. Runs a lot slower when I've got this Camtasia on here. Okay, let's try it again here. And it's just asking us for the radius. Remember this. And then we displayed the volume and the surface area. But what if you wanted to keep prompting the user for the radius and do calculations over and over again? And I'm going to show you an example here of using a while loop to say, continue to calculate until I, as the user, enter a 0. If I enter a 0, that means I want to quit. And that technique is sometimes called using a sentinel value. And so just to review, remember what our while loops look like? They always have this sort of logic. While the condition is true, then do some tasks. So what we're going to do is say, hey, while the radius is not 0, go ahead and perform our calculations. But if the radius is 0, then we're done performing the calculations and we want to exit. So let's add that to our sphere calculation code here. So we're going to just change this verbiage here a little bit to say enter the radius and give the user a little hint here. Otherwise 0 to quit. So when they type the radius in, they know if they type 0, it's going to quit. And then we're going to read that radius in. And once we have a value for the radius, let's set up our while loop. So while, and the condition is, while the radius is not equal to 0. So if it's anything but 0, we want to perform the calculations. But if it's 0, we're getting out. So if it's not 0, then we're going to perform all those calculations. Oops. And then we'll get out of our while loop here. I'll just write end of while loop. Okay, and if we run this now, we're going to have a slight problem, and I'm going to run it to show you what that looks like. But let's think about what's happening. If you enter a radius, and let's say you enter 5, it's going to calculate 5 and come back up. And is the radius not equal to 0? Do you see the problem we're going to have? You've never, once you get into this while loop, you've never gone ahead and prompted the user for another radius. So whatever their initial radius is going to stay. So let's see what that looks like, because that's an infinite loop. So let's say I enter 5 as the radius. Whoa, it just keeps calculating, 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 because we never prompt the user again for a radius. So remember, when you're working with loops, it's your responsibility to go ahead and press N there. We're done with that. It's your responsibility to make sure you don't get an infinite loop. You have to be able to evaluate this at some point so that it comes up and it isn't true. So we need to prompt the user again for the radius before they get out of the while loop. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So again, we're going to put enter this. Maybe I'll just cut and paste this from up here. We're going to put that right here. Enter the sphere's radius, and then I'm going to capture that information again before I get out of my while loop. That's going to give me the mechanism to, at some point, input that the radius is 0. So let's recompile that. Looks good. Let's pull up so you can see the whole while loop there. Okay, so here's the while loop. And let's run it again. Okay, so this first time we enter the radius, we're right up here. We're not in our while loop. So let's say I say 5. And we're going to enter this while loop. The radius is going to be 5, so that means it's not equal to 0, so that would be true, and it'll do the calculations. But before it leaves this while loop, it's going to ask me again, what's the new radius? So let's try it. So I hit enter. It does my calculations, and it's right here. Enter the sphere's radius. So I'm going to add another value, 3. And it goes back through the calculation because 3 is not equal to 0 and asks me again. So now let's say I say 0. Hopefully that's going to get me out. It's going to read 0, come back up here. 0 is not equal to 0. That would be when radius is not equal to 0. Well, the radius is 0, so that's going to evaluate to false, and we're going to pop out. And sure enough, we do. Okay. So this is an example of using the while loop with a sentinel value. And you have one of your homework assignments that asks you to do this. Here's a little tip. When you're working up these programs, get this core part working, all of your calculations or whatever task you need to perform. And at the end, add the while loop or the looping structure that keeps prompting the user, because that's just really frosting on the cake. So get all this other stuff working first. Okay, that's it for now. See you in class. Hopefully this was helpful.